Welcome everyone to another episode. We're back with Pete again. I think this is number 94. I've had you on so many times now. It's
Episode 94 with me, or just episode 94 in general?
exactly. With the conversations. We've got like so many different various things that we have that it's like the numbers are almost meaningless. But you were just saying you've getting sick from pollen season. Well, man, like I came back from Melbourne, and just for a week I had this kind of like gravelly voice, sniffly and all this sort of stuff. I don't know what it was. Melbourne things. I don't even think it was an actual disease. It was just being in Melbourne made me sick.
Contact sickness.
Yeah, I gotta say, man, like Melbourne's not my favorite place. It's
Whoa. Dude, it's like voted the world's most livable city for the 57th, recurring year in a... come on, man. What are you talking about?
Yeah, it's it's probably because people have nice cars, and so you're basically living in your car the whole time because you're just stuck in traffic, man. It's fucking ridiculous.
Well, go to Sydney. You'd enjoy Sydney more. That's my gripe with Sydney is just the traffic and the claustrophobia in the streets. I remember being in Sydney when we were living in Canberra. We went to a can't remember why we went. We saw some people, went to a party, but I remember trying to find a park just in a suburban street and being like, this is fucked. There's nowhere. And it was like, the street was one of those situations where it's 2 lanes, but there's no added space for parking. And so people just park on the side of the road with the 2 lanes. And so you have to do the whole driving down the middle of the street until you find a spot and or getting out of the way when the next car's coming. And I was just like, it's bad enough having that in Melbourne in some of the very old suburbs. I think like the ones around the center of the city, right? Like North Melbourne and that, you might have those sorts of side streets. But Sydney seemed to have quite a few of those. And I was just like, this is a fucking nightmare. I can't imagine owning a car here. I see why people would just, move around. But yeah, Melbourne, I mean, it's one of those things. I haven't lived in the city in Melbourne's, in a city in about probably 5 years now, maybe more. I think it was 2017 I finished up there. So yeah, 6 years. And I don't miss it.
Yeah.
But I think that's just city life in general, right? I kind of,
correct.
Once you adapt to suburban life and you don't have a reason to sort of be in the city and you get into your 30s and you no longer really give a shit about going out and clubbing and socializing every single night of the week, you kind of like, you tap out. And now when I've gone back to Melbourne, I'm like, I can't handle this.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I feel you.
Yeah. Well, my first introduction to Sydney was I flew down with my family on. I can't remember why we flew down on such a crazy flight, but we basically arrived in Sydney on midnight, and it must have been a midweek, and it was winter, cold. I was on my learners, so I was trying to get up my hours of driving here, which is...
So this was only a few years ago then.
Fuck up, man. Oh, geez. How many now? It's 15 years ago. Wow. And
Jesus.
Yeah, got in there. Dad's like, yeah, we'll get up. And I was like, well, I mean, like, I won't get much time. It's only like half an hour from the airport to wherever we were staying.
As the crow flies, yeah.
And sure enough, what turned out to be just like an hour and a half of stressful madness. The amount of roadworks and traffic, even at like 1 a.m., 2 a.m. on a weeknight, and one-way streets, and I was just... it aged me by... you're right. It was a couple of years ago. I just got aged by a decade from that one night driving there. Jeez,
I remember that experience. Yeah, with Sydney, and just having I don't know if it's unique to that location, or maybe it was at the time, but I remember it just being a total nightmare trying to drive around, even on the highways and stuff, and how long it took. I'm just being like, I remember there was a guy who used to bike to work. We went and stayed with him, and he was like, it's shorter for me to ride than it is to drive a car because of the traffic, because I just keep going down the side lane. And I was like, oh my God.
And he lives 50 Ks away or something.
Yeah, no, it wasn't that far, but it would take like half an hour from, whatever it was, 10 kilometers away. It would take half an hour or more on a good day. And so he would just be like, well, it's going to take me half an hour to ride it. So what does it matter?
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah.
Yeah, well, so I'm actually planning on some travel next year, and I was going to ask you about this in particular. And but one piece of advice I heard from Kevin Kelly, if you've heard of him before, it's kind of like used to be a guy who editor of Wired magazine,
Right.
and he was saying one of the best things to do whilst traveling is if you fly into somewhere, just get out of the city as quickly as you can.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been guilty in the past of flying in, and it's just like, it's so easy to just get a hostel, stay there for a couple of nights. I did that with Guatemala City, and that place was awful. Just a truly dangerous sort of place you didn't want to be. But yeah, I'm planning on actually going to Brazil next year. So
look out!
I met I had a Brazilian friend, a guy friend, who lives actually in Londrina. How do you say that?
I love how you have to stipulate that as if it's an issue if it was a woman.
Well, it's just like people could get ideas of why I'm going there. Do you know where Londrina is? Have you heard of it? How do you say it? Londrina?
I think is it spelt like you say, like Londrina?
Yeah.
Or Drina?
I think with just an N-A, not without any accents or anything.
Yeah, so it'd be like Londrina.
Yeah. So he lives there, which is, I believe it's west and a little bit south of Sao Paulo. So
yeah,
that area somewhere.
For those probably confused as to why you're asking me that, I'm married to a Brazilian and I speak Portuguese at home. So
correct. Yeah. So I was like, what's Pete's advice for going to Brazil?
I've never been, dude. So I've no idea. No, never been. I met my wife here. She was in Townsville originally and commented on one of my YouTube videos. And was like, because I teach English, so again, for anyone who doesn't know, and she was learning English at the time, and I'd started learning Portuguese, I think probably a month or two earlier, and I was like, "Oh, you're from Brazil? Do you want to do some, English for Portuguese kind of trades?" Yeah. And yeah, we ended up hitting it off, and didn't really care about the languages too much after a short period of time. So, but yeah, no, I've never been, and she hasn't been back since she moved to Australia, so it's been like 10 years for her, maybe less, maybe 8 years.
Yeah, that's fair.
It's been quite a while, but we want to go. But we've got 2 kids now, and fuck that, with 2 small children on, I imagine, at least 2 flights.
Yeah,
to get from Australia to Brazil.
100% 2 flights.
Do not want. I'd rather get a boat, I think, just so that I wouldn't have to be in a fart tube with them, with so many other people, and having to. My kids are full of energy and.
And what ages?
Very, very. What would you say? I'm trying to put it nicely. Very, precocious. So, no. The idea of having them in a confined space for any prolonged period of time is probably my worst nightmare currently.
What ages are they now?
2.5 and 4.5.
Yeah. Okay.
I think when the youngest gets to about my oldest age, like once she gets to 4.5, and you can actually negotiate with her and she understands and everything. Whether or not she learns that by 4.5 will be another story, but I think that's when it's kind of like, okay, now we can do it. But at the moment, there's just no real, just be patient. Good luck.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah. So
we got this guy recently. He's a pest. So I'm holding up a cat for anyone listening. This is Scrap. My son chose him, but he gets into everything. So he's going through my office at the moment. Just rummaging through everything.
And so was the name chosen before he was scrapping around everywhere, or?
I think so. Yeah, my son just picked that out of a hat. Effectively, I don't know where he heard it or came up with it, but he was like, "I want another cat, and I want to call it Scrap." And we were like, "Well, I guess we're getting another cat."
Getting into the plants? How's it?
Huh? Oh no, yeah. So I have a lot of indoor plants at home. So I mean, we have some in the living room. I sort of downsized a little bit there. Because, yeah, he just does get into everything. And I just don't know. I think it's a kitten thing, obviously, where they just are curious and they're constantly just sniffing things and pulling shit down and jumping on stuff and not understanding, physics. And so in the bathroom, we had 3 large plants that were up on a sort of, what would you say? Like one of those tables that you would get, but it has like 3 parts and they're at sort of unequal heights. So there's like 3 sections that you can put plants on and they're kind of staggered, right? And he just jumped up on that and ripped the whole thing down while my wife was having a shower and just smashed all the pots. And I was just like, yeah, this is going to be a problem. So,
Oh yeah,
downsized.
and look, it's probably better for your just general household cleanliness, because the the last I saw of your plants, they were everywhere.
Yeah, there were quite a few. But they've been the expensive ones, the ones that the investment plants. He's shutting the door on me. They're hiding away in a room, so I have to keep that shut. Initially, I used to have the door to that room open, and I would just have like a little kitty gate in the hallway, but he just fits straight through that. My other cat's too fat to jump over and to fit through, and didn't really care about that location. But yeah, he can jump over it easily and fit through it without him. At least currently, his head needs to get a little larger before he'll.
As we just seen, opening and closing doors, so probably just can unlock it.
Oh man, he's such a pest. Cats are just. It's so funny. Some cats, I think it's good. It's like with children, right? It's the good features of that person, that animal, also make it really annoying. And so he's really affectionate, wants to be around you all the time, and is playful and everything. But it means like when you're sleeping, he's just constantly wanting to jump on your head and pat your face. And in the morning when he's hungry, he comes over and starts licking my mouth, and I'll wake up getting, tongue kissed by my little cat and just being like, fuck me. So I have to like lock him out of the room, and yeah, but I'm just like, God damn it.
Yeah.
I'm going to get, I'm just going to get all sorts of cat herpes on my face.
Oh, nice. How is all the plant stuff going, man? I haven't really tuned into that channel as much as.
I've sort of slowed down. I had a YouTube channel where I was talking a lot about this stuff, and I've just sort of been overwhelmed more recently with just kids and work and cats. And I also got back into guitar after quite a while, and I found that there's obviously a threshold for energy and time, and yeah, so I've just been focusing mainly on work, kids, cats, and guitar.
It does seem like you'd really jump into your hobbies hardcore when you find a new one, when it's starting to take off. It's like, yeah.
Oh man, I don't know if it's a gift or a curse, but yeah, I definitely have that personality of diving in hard and going all out. And it was like that with guitars. I recently got back in, played for a few months on my old guitar, and was like, yeah, okay, I'm going hard. So ended up lashing out on a whole bunch of more expensive guitars, all the dream guitars that I wanted when I was a little kid that I could never afford, and now I can.
Yeah,
and I'm just like,
money. Yeah, reliving those things. Can you tell when it's going to actually start consuming time? Because I mean, like, if anyone's listened to any of our previous episodes, we cover like so many different topics, and it's not like you dived into, we were talking about those tiny Japanese fishing rods last time. It's not like you started creating that for yourself and making that. Can you tell when you're going to lose yourself in a passion?
I mean, you can tell when you're on it. I think for me personally, at least, and this is what I don't get. Like my wife, she just doesn't have this in her. She doesn't have the obsession, the urge. I don't know if it's a masculine thing. I don't know if it's just an ADHD thing or a hyper obsession, obsessive compulsive disorder sort of thing, or what the combination is there. But it's really funny because she's just like has no urge to kind of collect or to what would you say, just learn shitloads about a very specific area. Like she gets into stuff. Like at the moment, she's gone down the makeup rabbit hole a little bit.
That's a deep one, isn't it?
Yeah, and she enjoys it a bit, but again, she hasn't really, like, it was mainly a utilitarian kind of thing of like, she works in reception, she needs to present herself to the public, she wanted to wear makeup and she wanted to know a bit more about how to put it on, and so learned quite a bit initially, but then was like, got the basics done, and whereas for me, I have that intellectual kind of wanting to learn more about something for the sake of learning more about it. And then also this collector side of me that's like, I want to have a large collection of whatever the thing is that I'm currently possessed by in order to be able to experience those things. And I guess so with guitar at the moment, I have like, I think I went from 1 to about 10 in a few months, and bought pretty much a whole bunch of different types. And there is one side of me is kind of like, I just want a lot of the things, and I want a lot of the different things, and I kind of want them all. And the other side of me is kind of like, I want to be able to experience all of them so I can get a better understanding of what I enjoy and what I like, especially in that initial kind of stages of really getting into something. And then now I'm starting to downsize a bit. So I'm getting rid of the stuff that I'm paying attention to, how much I use certain guitars or play them, or the kind of music. Initially, I started just playing shitloads of Tool. So I got Adam Jones's custom, signature guitar from Gibson, and just was playing heaps of Tool on it. And now I'm learning the blues. So I'm playing heaps of blues on this Fender behind me. And so it's interesting just kind of like allowing it to take me where it wants to take me. That's part of it too that I find really interesting with the self-analyzing when I get into these hobbies. I try not to pigeonhole myself too deeply in one thing or another, and allow the journey to just kind of take me from, the initial stages to wherever it's going to take me. So I would never have thought, even 6 months ago, that I would be listening to Joe Bonamassa or Stevie Ray Vaughan or Jeff Beck. I never listened to these types of guitarists or these types of music when I was a lot younger. It was always sort of like alternative rock and metal and maybe pop rock to some degree, but never. I always thought the blues was a little lame, old man kind of lame. And then you get a receding hairline and you reach your 30s and you're like, well, I guess it's time to learn the blues.
Yeah, this is my jam.
No, but so I mean I'm rabbiting on, but yeah, I picked up the guitar because I think, what got me into it? Polyphia. I don't know if any of you guys know a band called Polyphia.
You mentioned
but they're
it last
an
time.
instrumental.
Did
I talk about them?
Yeah, and I started listening to a lot of their stuff as well. It's great.
My God, it's just amazing. They're all freak musicians. It is like one of those bands like Tool. You listen to Tool and it's like the singer's amazing, the guitarist's amazing, the drummer's amazing, the bassist's amazing, and their writing allows each one of them to shine through in the music. And so it can be a much more intellectual kind of process than, say, and again, with all due respect, listening to Taylor Swift or Justin Bieber, right? It's, again, objectively, it's pretty good music. It ticks all the boxes in terms of
it's catchy.
Yeah, exactly. But you're not listening to Taylor Swift going, "Fuck this guitarist." I tell you what, this guy's just killing it. He's just crushing it. But yeah. So I initially got into it because of Polyphia, and I was like, "Fuck!" I remember how much fun guitar was, because I used to always play when I was younger. I was in bands. I sang in bands. I played guitar in some bands, and I just wanted that kind of creative outlet again. Because once I dived in, I hadn't really listened to music for probably a decade, right? On and off, but not religiously, like when I was in a band, where it would be like, if I'm not talking to someone, I had headphones in and I was listening to something. But I've sort of gotten back into that, and I just remember that creative outlet, being able to create music. There's something about making music that is just there's a spiritual side to it, right? That just feels really, really, I don't know, fulfilling, relaxing when you get into the zone. Like with anything, right? Jiu-jitsu was the same. When you kind of get into a zone where you're not thinking about it, you're just kind of doing it. There's something very kind of meditative about it anyway. So I wanted to get back into that. I picked up my old guitar that had been in my parents' closet, and was like, if I play this for a few months, I'll start buying guitars, because there are a whole bunch that I wish I'd owned when I was younger, but never had the funds to be able to get. And then so I started getting some and just couldn't stop myself. And until recently, where I ended up spending $10,000 on that one. So I was like, I'm tapped out.
Oh yeah,
that's me maxed out. I'm gassed out. So
the plan hobby needed to take off.
Well, I had to sell a whole bunch of them to pay for the guitars.
Exactly.
That was pretty much the deal.
Of course. Yeah.
But the other side of it too is that I'm trying to invest in guitars that are going to maintain their value and or grow in terms of value over at least 5-10 years.
Well, that's the other thing that I've noticed with you. It's the collecting, but it's not. There's a financial aspect to it as well. It's not just pure wanton, completely like mad. I'm just whatever pops up at me sort of thing.
I think I have to be able to justify it. There's that side of it where if I'm going to spend that kind of money, I've saved up, I've worked hard, and I have money that I want to spend on a hobby or something. I want it so that if I die tomorrow, my parents, my family, my wife, my kids could sell this shit and get the money back. Whereas, if it was like a jacuzzi or a large TV or a secondhand car of some kind, it's almost always going to depreciate the moment you buy it and not be worth anywhere near what it costs to buy. Whereas, and that's I've noticed that too with myself, and it was the same with plants. There's something about the hunt of trying to find a good deal and trying to find the next thing. And I wonder how much that kind of ties in with shopping addiction, where you are getting probably a dopamine rush or a dopamine hit. And I can see how, like, once I was into the plants, I was like, and buying quite a few, trying to get my collection up so that I could grow them out and, cut them up, sell bits and pieces. I saw how, like, there's one side of it that is, I want to own all these things. I want to have them all, irrespective of how much they cost, whether they're cheap or expensive. But then there's the other side that's kind of like, I really enjoy the getting something in the mail, having something new arrive, and that feeling of, that unwrapping a gift kind of thing. Anytime I received something in the mail, I was like, oh, this is amazing. And then when you didn't have something in the mail, you'd be like, oh man, there's nothing coming this week. Fuck. I have to guess I have to get online and find something. Like, come on, Amazon. So yeah, but it is that's never completely taken over or anything like that for me personally, at least as far as I feel like I feel like I can control it, but I can see how, okay, this could be a runaway kind of addiction for some people where, as opposed to doing meth or something and getting your dopamine rush that way, you do it this way and just love buying stuff and always having something new and the hunt more so than having the thing, because afterwards you kind of like put it on the shelf and walk away and you're like, well, what's next?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, it's very different. I mean, I suppose just getting to the difference between you and your wife, it's maybe more just the general like male-female divide, which is men are more interested in things, women are more interested in like people, and so it could just be that sort of thing. For how I approach hobbies is very, very different as well, and it's like what's like the payoff that I get from things, and so when I think about the podcast or a lot of the exercise stuff I do, or even language learning, it's kind of the repetitive. It's like being able to tick off something. Like if I've done an hour of something a day, I kind of get a little, just a good feeling from that. And then the real payoff is usually a year or two down the track, where it's you have a conversation in the gym, like I did yesterday with this Colombian couple, and it's not perfect, but some days if you're working on it, it's better. And you're like, oh, whoa, I just used that word. Oh, I could understand them even when the fan was on above them, and it was kind of hard. So, yeah.
That's the side of things, I think, like exercise and language, that's so difficult, especially initially, because you want those returns, you want those improvements, and you may not necessarily see them or notice them, but they are taking place. Because I remember, when I was first learning Portuguese, I'm like, oh my God, this is just never going to happen.
It was same for me. Same for me with Spanish.
Yeah. And then you get to a point where you look back and you're like, whoa, shit, kind of made it. Like I'm me, again, not perfect, not a native speaker or anything, but can get by and can communicate.
Yeah.
And
I think the problem with a lot of language learning is it is very much, you kind of need to learn some of the grammar. You kind of need to learn these things, which 100%. Are most by and large, I think it has to be you focusing on it specifically, and it's not in that group environment. There's probably the thing I did most wrong, and why learning Spanish is, I'd say, arguably the hardest thing I've ever done, because I tried 100%. It a couple of times over the years. I tried it in like this big break that I had from uni before I started work. I started, when I was at work in the mining industry, before I went to Latin America, and every single time I kind of started and stopped, and it was because I was just doing it at home. And so even if I was getting some words, I didn't get any feedback from other people, and that was probably the thing I needed to fix. I should have done that by doing more online things with italki or whatever, LingoPie, whatever those services are, or getting out and meeting people.
It's sort of like going to the gym and getting fit, right? And then not utilizing the fitness that you're actually obtaining to do something productive, or something that you can actually objectively kind of measure, right? Like if you were to be running around in the gym all the time on a treadmill, but you never actually go out there and run in the real world, or race someone, or do something where you can actually appreciate how far you've come, and or have an interaction with other human beings whilst doing that task, or that hobby, that interest that you're trying to get better at. It's kind of like, it's going to be so much harder to motivate yourself. Same with playing music, right? I started getting lessons for guitar from my wife's work, and it's easy to just be a bedroom kind of guitarist or musician of any kind, right? Where you just play on your own by yourself and you're like, just keep to myself. But the social aspect of it is so much more motivating when even if you just go to a lesson and you're interacting with another guitarist and being able to play something and they play along with you, having that kind of conversation effectively, if you were to think about it in language learning terms, it's like that, getting together with other people is really at the end of the day what it's all about in most, if not all, hobbies, right? And sharing, even it's funny. Most of my lessons, I would imagine, we talk more than we play.
Yeah.
And it's just discussing stuff, sharing experiences, talking about songs. I have this issue. What do you do to solve this? And that is the real sort of wholesome thing that motivates me and keeps me on track and everything. And it's the same with languages. If you can, there's something about learning a language and being able to read a book or listen to a podcast and understand it. Do the passive side of things, and you can go really far with that. But at the end of the day, what's kind of the point if you're not ever going to use it with someone else and interact with a culture or a person or a group of people, and get to share your personality, be active in that thing, right? So I understand, and it was the same with Portuguese. I think too with languages in particular. People underestimate how hard it is and how big it is. I think, as you say, it's probably the hardest thing anyone will ever do. Learning a second language, like full stop.
Yeah.
It's like it, and for anyone who doesn't get that, you are probably a monolingual person who really has no appreciation for how much in your own language, but are just completely unaware of how advanced you are. In that one language. So it is definitely a humbling experience learning a language. But like when I was learning French, I think we've talked about it before, prior to starting my business, Aussie English, it was a similar sort of thing with the guitar thing where initially I was like, oh, this would be cool to sort of get Duolingo and do one of these apps and see what my French is like after 10 years of not doing it at high school. And I finished Duolingo in about, 2 months, like the tree of exercises and everything. And then I was like, okay, so I've noticed a slight improvement, but if I really want to get good, I can get good fast, but I'm going to have to go hard and I'm going to have to do as much as possible. And it was that combination of obsessive personality that I kind of have and interest in hard work that I was just studying at like 4 to 8 hours a day.
Yeah.
Just going berserk with how many podcasts can I listen to? How many people can I talk to online? How many books can I be reading? And like every spare minute, it was just French. And within 6 months, I was fluent, like in terms of basic fluency, being able to hold a conversation with someone who didn't speak English. And it clicked with me when I would go to French meetups. And I remember it clicking with me when I met someone there who had just arrived in Australia and spoke zero English. And I was having a conversation with them and able to converse with this person. And it was funny because prior to that, any person I'd spoken to in French almost always spoke English better than me in terms of French, right? Like their English was better than my French. So there was always that kind of crutch in the background of if any issues happen, if I can't understand them, I can always just go back to English and we'll be able to sort of get over those hurdles and then keep going in French. But the first time I had a conversation with someone where there were no crutches, there was nothing to lean on, I was like, fuck, like, okay, so this can be done. It just requires a significant amount of work. And that was a really eye-opening experience. I'm sure it would have been like you with Spanish, right? When you went to South America and were traveling around, you would have met loads of people that wouldn't have spoken English and you would have had those sorts of experiences.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the thing with that was you're a traveler, so it's kind of expected and you can kind of just almost run away from situations.
I don't know.
You book into a hostel and they only speak Spanish at the front desk, and you can just leave. You don't have to speak to them. You don't. But it was that was the thing that actually really kickstarted it for me. And I'm having this kind of like I wouldn't call it a dilemma. I suppose strategy wise, I need to sort of think over this next year. So I'm roughly planning on traveling in April, and I kind of want to go to Brazil for a couple of months and then perhaps be ending my trip in Portugal. So it's kind of worth learning some Portuguese at the very least, some like basic level. And but I also want to go to Germany and some of those countries, Austria, Liechtenstein, maybe.
Because you've been learning German, right? Middle.
Correct. So I'm at this kind of point where it's like, all right, I'm at this phase where I'm trying to learn, I guess, like 2 languages at the same time. And I know there's some techniques and people have some suggestions on, separate it based on days, and, some days of the week just do German only, or some days do Portuguese. But I don't know. I've heard, and then, it'd be great to like kind of just keep my Spanish at an okay level as well.
Well, I think you got to work out what's important,
Yeah, exactly.
And then also what works.
Yeah.
Because there's so many of those sorts of like polyglots giving advice online, and it's almost always, look, this is just one way of doing
it. Yeah,
like,
exactly.
It's worked for them, and therefore, a lot of them too sort of build themselves up like gurus. I've got a bit of a chip on my shoulder when it comes to online polyglots.
Man,
but
I'm glad, because we I think we've gotten the same vibe from them, because I've
well, they're always selling something, and the annoying thing with polyglots is that in order to maintain their position in the community as the kind of leader in terms of learning languages, they inherently need to be seen as really, really good in all the languages they're learning. And so quite often there are some that are relatively transparent with their actual levels. But when you start learning a language, it is so easy to see someone else learning the language who's slightly in front of you and think that they are about as good as a native speaker. Like, you have no real concept of the distance between them and a master of that language, a native speaker of that language. You have no real concept. And so you put them way closer to the native speaker than they deserve to be. It was the same with jiu-jitsu, and probably the same with guitar. It's that kind of ignorance, right? When you start picking up any kind of hobby or interest, it's very hard for you to kind of work out who are the real savants and freaks, and the ones that I need to be interacting with and giving, due respect to in terms of their abilities, and the ones who are okay and doing well, but are nowhere near the level of those people. And I think the annoying thing with polyglots, at least when I was really deep in the language learning sphere, was just that they would always position themselves as effectively native level in every language that they were learning. And you would just be like, the more mature you get in that kind of like realm, the more you realize that there's just no chance. It's just impossible. It's impossible to be native level in, I would say, more than a handful of languages, right? And in order to be native level in a handful of languages, you would have to be spending hours and hours and hours every single day, if you hadn't grown up learning those languages, doing that already. And
correct, yeah.
So those people who are like, I speak 10 languages, you're kind of like, that's bullshit. I mean, within reason, right? Like, I'm sure you probably have 1 or 2 that you're absolutely amazing at, including your native language on top of that. But the others will be all sort of that. It's the Pareto principle, right? Of the 20% is your accounts for 80% of the results, and then the rest is all trickling off down that reverse exponential curve. And so, I think if you would actually objectively test polyglots, and that's the other thing, they never have their languages really tested. It's just, I'm learning this language and now I'm fluent, and you're like, based on what criteria? Like, how did you measure this? Did you just determine that you were? What is fluency? Is that the ability to just say a few sentences and have a conversation, or is that the ability to, complete a PhD in that language?
Yeah. So I'm very careful with the fluent word. I'd never want to claim I'm fluent in Spanish, because I just know how far away that is. But
that's probably when you know you are.
Yeah, no, definitely not. It's funny though, because you can have these various levels where Juan, for example, my co-host, he's Colombian. He was born in Colombia. He grew and raised there until he was 9 years old. Then he came to Australia.
Horrible Spanish.
It's well, it's horrible for some reasons, but it's really funny, because I probably know more words than him, because I've spent this time just learning all these various things and going down rabbit holes, and he's just never needed to, but he speaks it more fluently than I do, for sure, because I still have to think about some things. I still don't use the reflexive verbs in the correct way, and subjunctive's always a little bit of a mythy for me.
That's the difficult thing, right, about language learning and fluency, proficiency, native level. Like, there are objective ways of measuring these sorts of things, but at the end of the day, you just have to be able to decide what you want to achieve, what you're aiming for, and are you able to do it, right? Like if you can hold a conversation about, the average topic in that language, then with someone who doesn't speak English, is that fluency? Should be, if you can communicate effectively and clearly, whether or not you're making mistakes isn't the point. You don't have to be perfect. Once you stop making any mistakes, you are fluent. It's like English speakers make English mistakes all the time. I make them on a daily basis. But yeah, the thing that I've noticed, at least with Portuguese, like I would say I'm very, very fluent in terms of conversational stuff at home. Do you want to go to the toilet?
Mm-hmm.
Talking to my son, do you want to go out to lunch? Are you hungry? Do you want to go to sleep? What do you want to do? Like all of that, I would guess, again, I'd probably be effectively native level at those conversations because I have them every day, 10 times a day. And it's been like that for the last 6 years. And it's just like repetition. But as soon as you want to ask me about politics or physics or some other topic that I never talk about because my wife doesn't talk about that stuff with me, my fluency drops to 0. And so it is this kind of, if you were to take all of Portuguese, I would consider myself, again, without measuring it, very, 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 very good at a very, very small amount of it. Like a very, very tiny circle in the center of all that is Portuguese, is what I can handle. And then, when you think about a native level, their circle is much larger, probably exponentially bigger than mine. And it will, the areas will be different that they cover as well. With my PhD, I remember doing my doctorate in biology, and I'm like, it took a while to become fluent in that language because I had to learn all of these words and topics and concepts and how to communicate those ideas with other scientists using really advanced kind of language very specific to that area. And then trying to also have conversations about what I was doing with people who didn't have that background. And you would see, these native speakers in this language aren't fluent in what I want to talk about because they don't know the vocab, but they also don't know the concepts. They have no understanding of what that thing is. And so it was really interesting when you have those types of, Pete, tell me about your PhD. And you'd be like having that, like that meme of seeing maths in front of your eyes of like, what level do I have to I don't want to say dumb this down, but like, how do I communicate these things to someone who probably has zero awareness of any of this? Because I have to not only communicate effectively and so that they understand it, but also teach them the concepts as I go. And so that was one of those moments. And I would have those experiences on a daily basis with other people who were doing PhDs or studying or doctorates or whatever in other areas where I would be just a complete noob because I was, again, whenever you study anything, you get very good at that very small thing and everything else you just have no idea. So I would be talking to, say, paleontologists about, fossils, and that would be like those two words are pretty much my vocab when it comes to, dinosaurs or whatever. I would be like, yeah, I don't know any of the other things that you just said to me. So it was funny just paying attention to lack of fluency in terms of your native language in certain areas. And then, when you sort of have that awareness when learning a foreign language, I don't know, it puts things in perspective a little bit more, and you just have to work out what do you want to be good at. If you want to be able to travel around, you don't need to be able to talk about physics. You just need to be very good at a few small things and the basic grammar.
Where's the viewpoint describing landscapes? Yeah, that's exactly the same with me. If you want to talk about travel or my trip in particular, I can nail that down exactly. But in the gym, this girl, this Colombian girl, she had a cast on her foot. And, I was asking, I started to talk about it and I just went, oh, crap. This is like dangerous territory.
I don't have the vocab.
I didn't know how to say cast. I didn't know how to ask her about her, what do you think that you put on crutches? Didn't know how to say crutches.
100%. See all these words. I'm just thinking now, what's the Portuguese equivalent? I wouldn't know.
Yeah.
But the funny thing is, and again, this is where fluency comes in. You don't have to know the words for those sorts of things to be quote unquote fluent or have a fluent conversation with someone. You just need to be able to navigate those holes, exactly. Right? And that again was that sort of light bulb moment with French, I think, when I could work out how do I like get around not knowing the vocab for that. And you would just say, oh, the thing that's on your leg, what happened? Did you hurt your leg? What's that thing called again? and then they tell you, and you'll be like, cast. Okay, so why have you got a cast on? When's the cast coming off? So you would have those interactions on a regular basis, and I still do that with my wife all the time, where I'll pretty much just always be saying, "Que es coisa? What's this thing again? Like, qual palavra para isso, you know? What's the word for this again? I can't remember." And if the layman who didn't speak Portuguese would be like, "Damn, his Portuguese is really good." And the whole time I'm just like,
"What's this?
How do you say this? What's that again? What does this mean?"
Nice.
I know.
I wouldn't ask you about the Portuguese, but another funny little story, and you'll enjoy this because it's like going down a rabbit hole. I was looking up the kind of like Scrabble World Championships, and I found this Scrabble YouTube channel.
Oh, God.
And it was
that'll be a rabbit hole.
Oh yeah, it was, dude, it's so cool. And it's this guy who's kind of presenting the parts of the history of Scrabble, of tournaments, of it's kind of, how there's those chess channels where they'll discuss like most famous games, or they'll have all these really cool titles of, the battle of the tigers or something, and it's just another chess game. It's nothing to do with tigers, but this guy had this there's this one guy in the US, I've forgotten his name, who was just basically kind of this savant level of Scrabble, and the Scrabble rules, when you actually play competitively, they've got all these different things where you can challenge people based on certain words, and you have to use this dictionary but not this dictionary, and trying to get a bingo on it and stuff. And this dude,
see, that would drive me nuts. I think
which aspect?
Having the whole those sorts of rules of like, does this word count? And you're like, well, if you've just said it's a word, at least from my basic understanding of Scrabble, I'd be like, all words are on the fucking table.
Yeah, well
we're doing it in Portuguese and English, baby.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what they do. You can put a word that's not an actual word on the game board. If they don't challenge it, then it remains. So you can,
wow.
You can
okay, so you can bluff.
You can
in
kind
that
of bluff
sort of
a little
sense.
bit, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what happens if you do challenge it? And you get it wrong, and it is a word? Do you get in trouble? Is there a negative incentive?
Yeah, you get a punishment. Yeah, so it's got these really cool game dynamics. And this guy,
I had no idea you could bluff in Scrabble.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's a pretty fascinating game. And there was this game that these two guys played where they both had these kind of really shit letters at the start. And you can pull out letters from the board, and basically you want to start off with something strong. And so this one guy put out this word, which was once again a bluff word, or he didn't know. The other guy challenged it, and so he had to drag it back. And then they were kind of playing this game of back and forth where they were both trying to bluff or trying to put these words down. And it ended up being like one.
Neither of them had the letters to make any words.
They did, but they just didn't want to put it down. And one guy was definitely the weaker of the two. And it got to this really funny position where he was basically like, look, if no one puts a word down after 4 turns or something, the game goes to whoever has the most kind of like the least amount of points on their little deck, on their 7 letters. And so he was like, I've got a better chance of winning by just taking the potluck of having less points on my board than this other really good guy has. And so I'm going to kind of like intentionally lose. It's those weird positions where you can have another one of this was this soccer game where this team, because of the rules they had in this competition, they basically either needed to win by 2 or go to the golden goal. And so they were winning the game, and they needed to score another goal to be able to kind of like qualify for the next round. But there was only like 5 minutes left or something. And so what they did instead was they scored an own goal in the last minute to force it to extra time so that they could then have the chance to play in the golden goal and win there. So it's this really like, you can have all these really interesting dynamics. But getting back to the Scrabble guy, he learnt French Scrabble. So he didn't know any French words, but this guy was just an amazing Scrabble player and basically got the French dictionary, read it up, went to France and played and won the French Scrabble championship without even being able to speak French, but he just knew all of the French words. So
I feel like that task would be so much harder than actually
savant as well.
Yeah, I feel like that task though would be so much harder than actually learning the language. Just memorizing words that you didn't have a
Yeah,
context
exactly.
for.
For
Like,
the
come
average
on.
person. For this guy,
Yeah,
no.
yeah. Have you seen that guy who goes to Iceland and learns to speak Icelandic in a
Yes.
week?
Yeah, that's an
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah, another one of those
Photographic memories. Yeah,
just crazy.
those people with photographic memories blow my mind. And yeah, it's one of those things where you're just like, God damn. I wish, that it was an adaptation that was selected for in humans to be able to remember things exactly. But that's me saying that without the ability to do it, because I can imagine that if you saw someone die in front of you and you had a photographic memory, that would be probably pretty unpleasant to be able to recall that in vivid detail for the rest of your life,
Yeah, I
right?
wonder if
So,
certain things get stuck in their brains more. Because I remember I was at the kind of calisthenics park here in Brisbane once, and there was this sticker on it, and it was kind of like they always like to use animal things for calisthenic stuff. It's like
mhm.
the Ape Society, whatever. It's just drawing monkey comparisons usually, and it was something like Dong Kong, or I can't remember exactly what it was, thankfully, but it got stuck in my brain, and I could not unforget this one little thing
Yeah.
I'd seen. It was like a week, man. It was just stuck in my brain. Every time I went to work out, I was thinking of it. And so I was
I
just
always
wondering, yeah, do these guys get a similar thing where they can just remember everything and then this
there's
one gets stuck in their brain?
again, there's very little I know about them, but I imagine that they have the ability to remember certain things more, what would you say, recall it faster, quicker than others, right? Like I would imagine it's kind of like a filing system where they have access to a lot more files than the average person in terms of files being memories, but there would still be certain files that would be like at the front of the filing cabinet and other ones that are at the back
Yeah.
that they have to do some work to be able to dig up. But yeah, when like I think I saw someone, there was one back there that could read Harry Potter from memory, and it would just be like, how the hell?
Yeah.
I can't imagine what it's like to be able to say, okay, page 271, the 50th word was the,
Yeah.
and just be able to picture it, close your eyes and picture it in your head, and you're just like that amount of detail. And I think that's where that myth of humans only using 10% of their brains came from. I think, that idea of there are people out there who seem to be able to do so much more than the average person that we're not using anywhere near as much as we could be.
I
But
think part of that
in
was also brain technology of scanning MRIs,
yeah,
fMRIs, and that sort of thing, and they'd only see 10% of it active, or something like
well,
that. It's like,
but I just don't understand how at the time you didn't realize that perhaps whether or not, like if you were to scan a car and look for where the electrical activity is taking place, it's kind of like, yeah, it's around the engine, but that doesn't mean the rest of the car is obsolete and not being used,
exactly,
right? Like
yeah,
it just has a different purpose in terms of the whole thing being used to do a specific thing. You can't really take away too much of it before it becomes useless. It's like there's not much going on in this tire. We'll just remove that.
yeah,
And it's like, yeah, well now it's
yeah,
useless.
exactly.
So, but it is funny how much people like the lobotomy stuff. Did you ever look into that and where that came from?
Not lobotomies, but I do know a bit about removing of brains, and half your
Yeah.
brain getting destroyed or something, and then still being able to function, not
Or
completely.
people with
But
epilepsy where they
yeah, they split the
slice
brain
between
as
the
well.
two, they
Yeah,
separate the hemispheres, right?
yeah,
There's a crazy again. I think it's from listening to Sam Harris a lot of this sort
yeah,
of stuff, and he
exactly.
talks about it. But I'm pretty sure there was one study where they had people who had that situation where the two hemispheres were separated, and they could sort of split the their vision down the middle of their head, right, so that only one eye could see one side. And if they were doing certain things, the other one half of the brain wouldn't be aware of it happening
Yeah,
effectively
yeah, that's
because they
super
weren't
cool.
able
Yeah,
to communicate. So they would touch you or do something on one side and you would react on that side, but the other side wouldn't. And I remember just being like, oh my God, mind blown at just the complexity of how it all works. But also imagine, where is your soul at that point, right? Like if your brain has been split down the middle and you're alive, it's like if you removed one half, are you still there? And if you can just arbitrarily remove either half and you're still there, like what does that mean in terms of where you
yeah. Which
reside?
which
Yeah.
one are you? It's kind of the same with
Yeah, I don't know. Thinking about that sort of stuff is cool, but I wonder how much we'll ever really know about that stuff.
yeah. I don't know. Some of those things they're like interesting, but consciousness is just such a slippery, slippery, slimy thing. Like it's hard to really get a grasp on what it actually is. Another one,
Yeah.
I read this book recently called "Swearing is Good for You" by Emma Byrne, and
I think I've heard of this. Yeah.
It wasn't like the craziest, most mind boggling book. It's kind of like one of those popular science kind of books, which is, it's okay, but I think probably most of it will be obsolete in 10, 15 years time, to be honest. But there was this funny section where she was talking about how exactly these people with not exactly these people with left brain, right brain splits, is more one side had been damaged, so the other side was taking over. And so I think it was the right side is the more, I always switch this up. The right side's the more kind of creative, expression sort of side, and the other's the more analytical decision making, that sort of thing. And she was it was really funny because she was saying, like, okay, if someone gets damaged on the creative side, they'll start to use more swearing as a way of on the kind of analytical side of being able to express emotions, because that's what a lot of swearing is. It is, when you hit your toe against a table, you don't say cat. It's usually an expression which is considered taboo. And then she was also saying, though, if someone damages their brain on the left side, so the the analytical side, the side of being able to make decision making and things like this, they'll start swearing more as a way of communication, because it was like it was something related to, swearing's good for communication, it helps do these certain things, whatnot. So I was basically like, okay, so if you get brain damage, you're going to swear more. Is what I took.
Well, interesting that you say that, because the whole time I'm thinking, I remember someone talking about a study with patients that had Alzheimer's, and they would get to a point where they could no longer talk properly, but they would still swear in certain situations, like hitting their leg or something. They'd turn around and be like, fuck, and but you would not be able to get a proper, series of sentences out of them normally. And yet that would be one of the last things to go in terms of the verbal use that they have. And I think it was explained like it was housed in a different part of the brain where, those emotional reactions to things elicit certain words to come out of you that may potentially bypass, the part of your brain that is the sort of linguistic area where it's you thinking about grammar and putting together a sentence and everything, those reactions of just shit, fuck. And so, they were talking about how like a lot of Alzheimer's patients would get to the point of not being able to talk or have conversations anymore, but they would still swear because they would, have situations on a daily basis where they would be frustrated or angry or in pain or something, and that would come out. And I found that kind of amusing that that's sort of like the last thing to go in terms of language is going to be the swear words.
Yeah, exactly. They're so deep. Just so deep within your brain.
I guess they just have so many uses, right? Yeah, you're not going to say car. You're not going to attach a lot of these other words to emotional responses the same way that you would with swearing, because it can be used for so many different things, being upset, being angry, being happy. You can just emphasize that emotion by swearing. And then, so it would be interesting to study that across different languages and how that takes place, though, especially if you were to do something like Alzheimer's patients in languages like Japanese. Again, I have very limited understanding of Japanese, but one of the things I often hear is that it doesn't have swearing the same way that English does. Instead, it's
they've kind of got a
tone-based thing in the way that you...
I made some clips from you talking about this last time, and some people were saying that there are a couple of words, but it's very much more based on, it's like politeness. So the words that they have are not typically these kind of taboo ones. It's more of ways of being impolite rather than
I would imagine it's sort of like as opposed to like go fuck yourself, you would probably be like go away, sort of thing. And the way that you say that as opposed to go away, is the real way of showing offensiveness. At least that's what I have in my mind. Japanese speakers, feel free to correct me.
Well, in like the Netherlands, I think it's if you say cancer is kind of a swear word that you can use there and things like that. Finally enough,
you'll learn that in Portuguese. The amount of swearing they have, everything is dick and vagina. Like it's just insane.
Exactly.
How many different things they have for it. I don't know if it's like that in Spanish too. I know in Spanish they're very descriptive. Like I remember I was working in a Spanish restaurant and we were talking, like, anytime you're learning languages, it pretty much always comes back to swearing at some point initially when you're learning, like, because contrasting those differences and similarities is always so much fun. But I remember talking to my Spanish friends and colleagues at the restaurant there and being like, so they would, is it hija de puta, right? Like brother of a whore or something that they would say all the time. And I'd be like, that's so fun. Like,
I mean, they use it in certain ways. So there's like ihe, which is Hijue, which is, I think it's kind of a mix between hija and hijo, which is son, daughter and son, or being
sibling,
sibling.
Yeah.
So and putas,
yes.
I mean, puta can be a lot of things.
I know, but yeah, I remember that, and Spanish was much more descriptive. Like, I shit on the grave of the whore that gave birth to you.
Yeah.
And that's like, whoa, my God, that's so offensive. Whereas I think if you said that to someone in English, that would almost be a way of breaking the ice. Like, in terms of making someone laugh, they would be like, that was nice. Overly descriptive.
Yeah, good one. At this exact moment of time, because I have not yet started to learn Portuguese, I know more swear words than I do just regular Portuguese words. Because my friend was teaching me all the swears. Yeah,
it's so fun learning that stuff. I remember learning it with my wife, and the initial stages when learning a language of not having any kind of conceptualization of how bad a word is. Like, again, hopefully it doesn't offend too many Portuguese speakers, but I might drop a few of them. But, using caralho, which is like a really bad word for it's used in a lot of different ways, but it's like dick, effectively. It's the worst way to say dick, at least based on what I've been told. And initially you just think caralho, like, it just sounds so nice.
Yeah,
when you're a language, you're like, it doesn't sound like a kind of word. It sounds like a dessert or something. Like, we're gonna eat some caralho. Like, do you guys want some?
I'm definitely gonna clip that.
Yeah, I know, that's it. But yeah, there's quite a few of those in Portuguese where, from an English speaker's perspective, where a lot of our swear words have consonants at the start or at the end, especially the percussive ones, ones that are like, those sorts of consonants are in there. We associate that as English speakers with rude words, right? Like cock and cunt and fuck and shit. They all have these, like, really, if you really want to say it, it's like, and it has this kind of emotion to it. But I remember, initially learning like caralho, and it just didn't. It always just made me kind of giggle. Like, just doesn't sound that bad, You'd be like, really? You use this to sort of just to, like, surely you got something better than that,
Yeah.
But there's a lot of those sorts of words in Portuguese where everything else too just means dick or vagina. Like, I'll say words in a sentence and I'll think I'm pronouncing it correctly, and my wife will be like, you just said vagina. And I'm like, another one? Like, another word that means vagina? Jesus.
Have you got any, recommendations, any interesting tips for someone who's looking to learn Portuguese, just in terms of, anything interesting grammar-wise that you found from growing up, like regional differences? Is there plenty of things?
Well, if you're going to Sao Paulo, obviously I'd probably say learn the Paulista accent, which is easier than some of the others. Like there's one from Rio de Janeiro. You're going to notice that there's shitloads. There's like 25 or more different regional sort of accents and dialects in Brazil. Mm-hmm. The most common ones are going to be Paulista and Carioca, which is Rio, right? Yeah. So if you learn either of those, but if you're not going to Rio, don't learn the Rio one, obviously. But the Paulista one is mainly that they say the R's at the end of words like an American. So they would say something like falar instead of falar, which is how I would say it with the northern kind of accent. And then Rio is more, they'll say the S's as SH.
Yeah.
So it will be like, trying to think of a word. Gosto, right? That can mean taste or I like something. Gosto. They would say gosto. So you'll notice those sorts of subtle differences. But really, I think most of the content you'll be learning with would be Paulista, because I think that's where the majority of Brazilians kind of
from.
I think basically. So focus on that. But to be honest, if you already have Spanish, the thing I'd be worried about is it fucking your Spanish up or you mixing the two. You'll be able to use your Spanish to pretty much get away with Portuguese. So I think if you focus a lot on the basics and learning the pronunciation, you'll probably be able to kind of fake it.
That was
like you're at a much more advanced level, much more quickly.
That was going to be my plan, yeah, because that's the thing I struggled with most when listening to Brazilians in particular was like, honestly, at times it sounds like Arabic. It just sounds so completely different. But then when I hear them speak slowly, I basically know what they're saying, and it's very much. It was the pronunciation and of words that would really stuff me up in terms of my comprehension.
I would say then focus on the vowels, because that was the difference. Spanish, I think, only has 5 vowel sounds that are kind of distinct.
Yeah, the normal stuff, yeah.
Portuguese has 20-something, I think.
Yeah, because they've got all the accents over them.
There's more than English. Well, the accents don't really mean anything besides changing the vowel sound slightly.
Yeah.
Like if you see the tilde, it's just a nasalization. And so they have that part of it makes it more advanced and more complicated, where a lot of their vowel sounds will have equivalents that are nasalized. So you'll have, say, like pow, which means wood or dick. And then you'll have pão, which means bread. And so you have to learn the difference. Those vowels are effectively the same, but for the fact that pão is nasalized with the up in your nose, and pow is not nasalized.
And of course, it's words which are so similar. Año, which means year, and ano, which means anus. Of course, you're going to use year all the time, so you need to make sure you got the enyo right.
Would that be? Well, in Portuguese, it would be ano is year, and then I think it's anal would be your anal, right? And then anel is like ring.
Yeah, of course, anillo in Spanish.
Yeah, exactly. So but you'll learn that because there'll be all these patterns that kind of directly translate across. That like the "o" at the ends of words, I think in Spanish would be "ano" a lot of the time. Like "santo" is "são." I think they have "santo" as well in Portuguese, but São Paulo is like Saint Paul,
makes sense,
right? Yeah, so you'll learn. I think you'll see and learn and understand a lot of those shortcuts really quickly as a result of having Spanish grammar. There are some differences grammatically, but I think, again, if you just learn the pronunciation and then those shortcuts, like words ending in "o" instead of, what's the equivalent of Asian, like the ATION at the ends of words in Spanish is ación, right? Yeah. Like, in Portuguese it would be like ação. So you just learn those different endings, those different suffixes and prefixes, and I think you'll be able to just switch across it. But then there'll be certain words, and you can probably just shortcut this by looking up like key differences
exactly.
in vocab between Portuguese and Spanish. One of the ones that always screwed me up was like in Spanish you say pero, right, for but. Pero yo quiero hacer blah, 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 but I want to do this. In Portuguese, it's mas eu quero fazer isso. I want to do this. Eu quero fazer isso. Mas. And so learning those, because if you say pero, I don't know what, I think they'd understand, but it probably means something else.
Yeah, exactly.
They'd be like,
Yeah.
But well, we could talk about this all day, but it may be boring for the listeners.
No, that's good. They'll take what they get. The funny thing with this is actually probably one of my strong suits has been the pronunciation. I've always had a bit of an ear for it, so that I say things right. I've never actually really had to focus on. It's only every now and then where I'd make a glaring error of still pronouncing the H in certain, and it would only be in certain words. So I wouldn't say it in hola. I wouldn't be saying hola, but in certain words, I still would chuck it in a little bit, and I need someone to just be like, "Oh, by the way, you're still doing that."
There's one that you'll get in Portuguese. The double R is pronounced as an H sound.
Yeah.
So getting used to that, because in Spanish it's a rolled R, right?
R, yeah.
Like if you were to say dog, perro, right? You have to say the R. Whereas if that word was Portuguese, it'd be perro.
Perro, yeah.
But the word for dog is cachorro or cão.
Yeah. So this will be fine, because there's kind of the stuff I'm actually relatively good at, and I'm going to throw American listeners under the bus here, because the worst pronunciation I've heard of other languages. So someone's spent the effort to learn another language, but not pronounce it right. Has been Americans. There is just something about them where I don't get it. How can you learn a whole another language and then be speaking just American accent? It's like, yo quiero un cerveza, por favor. And it's just like, what are you doing,
it comes back to
man?
it comes back to the education system, though. Like, French is the same. French people, France. It's, renowned to be atrocious in terms of the education system having decent English teachers who, when I was there, when I was a teenager and we went to some schools and we were in the classes where they were teaching English, every single English teacher was a French person and they had an awful accent. And again,
yeah, crazy.
You could understand them, you could communicate with them. That wasn't the issue, but that was one thing. Whereas when I was in Australia, what everyone wanted to learn was French from a French speaker, really, like not another Australian. Although, there would be the odd one that was okay, it wasn't a problem, but there's that. And then I remember chatting to a few French people. I always ask them, when they're learning English or I meet them through my work,
why
sort of like, why are French people why are French people so stereotypically bad at pronouncing English words? Where, I'll have that thing come up of, you'll be listening to an author who's like world renowned speaking English and he's French, and you can barely understand what he's saying because of his accent. But when you really analyze it, he's not making any grammatical errors. And you're kind of like, how the fuck do you level up your grammar to that level and that ability? Your vocab is probably better than mine. You read more than I do for sure, but your language is so hard to understand because you still have effectively baby level pronunciation skills, right? Like I always think about it in terms of Pokemon. And I remember when I first started playing Pokemon when I was a little kid, every single kid I knew who had the game pretty much got Charizard, Bulbasaur, or what was the other one? Squirtle at the start. And they just leveled the fuck up out of that one Pokemon. And it would be like, I catch other Pokemon, but then they just sit there and do nothing. And I just have the one that's like level 100 in a zone where every other Pokemon's level 5. And I just fucking plow through, because I'm just like brute force. They're a water Pokemon. I'm fire. They should win, but I'm level 100 and they're 12. Boom, And I feel like a lot of people do that when learning English in particular. If they have an awful accent, but their English is good, it's kind of like they've learnt the bare minimum to be able to get by in terms of their pronunciation. And then they've just tapped out and they're like, fuck it. And they focus on grammar, reading, writing, vocab, everything, a fluency. But the annoying side of that for the people that they're interacting with is that it puts all the burden of comprehension in a conversation on the other person, on the native speaker or non-native speaker too, if they're speaking to them. And that was always the thing that frustrates me when learning a language. And I had this irritation the opposite way when I was speaking French and I would try and talk to people who were Australians and they would come to these meetups and they would have atrocious accents. I would just be like, I can't speak English to me because I'm hearing an Australian accent.
Yeah, exactly.
But then I'm hearing French words at the same time. And it's fucking my mind.
Yeah.
And I can't, because I'm anticipating hearing English words from your accent the way that I hear it. And so it's the opposite in French. When you hear really strong French accents and they're speaking English, you're kind of like, especially if you speak French, you're like, I'm trying to hear this in terms of me listening out with my French ears, but I can't, I have to follow with my English. So yeah, I remember that being one of those things where I think, how does this happen? But with French, when I've spoken to people from France, the ones that I had spoken to who are sort of my peer group, my age, said that you'd get bullied atrociously at school if you put on an English
nationalism
accent.
sort of.
Yeah. And it was all French like, looky here. Like, whoa, someone thinks they're English, huh?
Yeah.
And we used to kind of have it the opposite way for French. Like if you did really well in French at school, I went to private school. And so everyone was pretty much a douchebag, including myself. If you did a really good French accent, everyone would kind of be like, wanker, like in the class, until later on you get to like year 12 and everyone who wants to be there is there for a reason, exactly, right? Yeah. So I think it's probably that on steroids to some degree. But in America, again, I would probably say that their education system by and large is atrocious. And so I imagine that they probably have, pretty average teachers teaching Spanish who probably aren't native speakers of the language themselves. I mean, they probably are in certain areas, but by and large. So I don't know. That's me just throwing shit at the wall and guessing.
I'm imagining that their Spanish teachers are like, did you ever watch Community? It's
I've seen bits and pieces.
It's like that, the Asian guy is the Spanish teacher and he's just off the wall, unhinged, crazy, but he's the Spanish teacher. It's like, okay, yeah.
It's so hard though, right? Because there's the language community has this huge thing, especially the English language learning sphere, where there's a really big portion, as soon as everyone started going woke about 5, 6, 7 years ago, when that whole thing started up with everyone being politically correct and really like having their heart in the right place and wanting to be inclusive and not offend other people. I think we're starting to see the pathological side of that, where like in terms of language learning, I would feel pressure ever talking about pronunciation and aiming for a native level accent, and even saying things like native speaker it became this dirty thing of like, you shouldn't have to aim for that, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, yeah, whether or not you should is sort of subjective, right? Like that's up to the individual. And at the end of the day, what are we basing what we're learning off? Usually it's native speakers. We're not picking, I'm not looking for another Aussie who's learnt Portuguese, and then I'm thinking, fuck, I really want to sound like that guy. I'm looking at Portuguese speakers from Brazil, and I'm thinking I want to model my pronunciation, my accent, my speaking on this group, this person, whatever, because that's going to get me the closest to being able to communicate with those people. I'm not learning Portuguese to chat to other Australians in Portuguese. And so when that whole woke thing happened, it was really interesting because there was such a big pushback against correcting other people's pronunciation or even encouraging them to try and develop a native level accent. And I think it comes from a good place of not wanting to discriminate against people who don't have amazing accents or find it difficult to impersonate a foreign accent or learn a foreign accent. But then one side of it is, so then fucking don't bother, and it's not your problem if other people don't understand you. It's their problem because they're bigots.
Okay.
And
There's
I think
news
that
to me,
kind of attitude,
I've never heard any of this, so this is really interesting.
that kind of attitude doesn't really help anyone. I remember thinking, like, at the end of the day, you can have that kind of opinion.
That opinion usually gets sorted out by, I want to say like the market, which was, I remember whilst learning Spanish, and I was like, they should understand me when I want to say like, quiero tener un plato de este. Like, I want to have a thing of this. But you can't use to have like that. You have to order like, can I take something like that? And I used to use it. And I was like, they should understand. Like, the literal translation is And then, of course, as a rational human being and seeing...
It's that sort of facts don't care about your feelings. Native speakers don't give a shit about your opinions, about the language is used, how the language is used. And if they can't understand you, that's your problem, not theirs, right? So that was the side of it that really started irking me, and was like, my focus wasn't on teaching English to people all over the world. My focus was teaching Australian English and culture and history and everything to people effectively migrating or planning to migrate to Australia to become part of this country, culture, everything like that. And so having that kind of attitude is not empowering the people who are trying to make a life here and come to Australia. If you say to someone, you learn English, but don't worry about pronunciation, fuck it. It should be the person who's speaking to you, listening to you, that it's their problem. It's kind of like, okay, well, good luck getting a job, right? Like if you can't be understood easily, then that's just a big red flag for someone wanting to hire you, because they're going to be like, well, we're going to pick the person that we could really communicate clearly with. And so I remember just thinking, like, this is just not helpful. At the end of the day, pronunciation matters, not because in and of itself, like, you don't need to sound like an Australian and be a spy level, linguist, where I can't tell the difference between you and Pauline Hanson's, regional accent. But you need to be able to speak well enough, pronounce words clearly enough and well enough that we can understand you as clearly as possible, because it's all about communication. And if your communication can get to a level where it is as good as possible, then that's the ultimate goal. Pronunciation, for better or worse, is part of that, and you have to deal with it. And so, I remember getting so irked during this whole thing of trying to, pressure people to learn an Australian accent, or even talking about it as being a goal. The fact that it should be a goal to try and learn an Australian accent is racist, is bigoted. You're a piece of shit if you think that way. And it would be like, at the end of the day, I don't care about what you think of me. I care about what these people can do when they get here.
So did you get any of that directed at you?
A little bit, yeah. There's a few. Crazy. There's one teacher who is an Australian, but he lives overseas in Spain, and he just stopped talking to me. Yeah.
Yeah, wow.
He was just
That's
like,
crazy.
yeah. It was just like, yeah, you're written off.
Have you noticed actually any trends amongst the people coming here who you've helped taught with because you've got like the business I suppose behind your podcast as well of I don't know, nationalities, types of people, any standout characteristics of people who do get the pronunciation really well, or vice versa, of people who don't, who struggle with it,
I
or
think it's a personality thing more so than
won't learn
necessarily a background or whatever. I think really it's like, I remember chatting to one guy. He paid me to give him private lessons earlier on, maybe 5 years ago. And I got on the call with him and he was in Germany. And I was chatting to him and I was like, my heart sank because initially I was like, he's Australian. What the fuck? Why is he hired? I can't teach him shit. Like,
Yeah.
what the hell? Why am I here? And it turned out that he was autistic and German, but had lived in Australia for a few years and just mastered the accent.
Wow.
Nailed it. That will always stay with. But I remember him telling me about his autism and how hyper obsessed and focused he was on the accent. And I was just like, holy shit. Like an adult who came to Australia in his 20s or maybe even later, who didn't have English, got English, and then mastered the accent to the point where I didn't even know. I wouldn't have been able to tell you. If he hadn't told me that, I wouldn't have known. I would have thought he was Australian.
Yeah.
I would have been like, there may have been, the more I spoke to him, maybe there would have been certain things that came through where I would have been like, okay, maybe he was born, raised here, and then lived in Germany for ages, and it's just kind of muddled his English up a bit, and it's not, quote unquote pure kind of like dialect. He's always been in a small town in regional Australia. But yeah, I remember just having my mind blown. But it was just, so I think at the end of the day, it's just how much effort and time you put into it. And like fitness, I think pronunciation is one of those things because you're using your mouth, you're using, muscles, your face, to be able to say certain things. It has to be something that you work on constantly and train because you haven't done it from birth. I think even me, I would probably, my accent would get screwed up if I went overseas and lived there for a significant amount of time and didn't speak English, right? I always imagine, tangent, William Buckley, right? The guy in the early 1800s who was a convict. He was brought over to Sorrento down here on Port Phillip Bay, and he ends up running away from the British soldiers and everything, and lives with the indigenous people around Port Phillip Bay, the Wathaurong people, for 35 years. 35 years he lives with them, learns the language, the culture. He sort of ends up having a thing with a young woman and everything. Like he's fully embedded. And then when Batman and his crew, one of the founders of Melbourne, they came over 35 years later. I think it would have been like 1835, 36. And they found Melbourne. They find it. He comes out of the bush, this white dude with a huge beard and a spear, warning them like, the black guys are going to kill you guys. Like, you better be careful because they're planning to knock you off. I always really, really wish I could have been there to hear his English.
Yeah, what was his English like? Yeah, that'd be fascinating.
And because he tells his story later on, he has his story written down, his personal sort of account through someone who writes it. And again, definitely embellishes the story and talks about cannibalism and all that sort of shit. Mm-hmm. But you're kind of like, okay, so he did end up learning English again or relearning it, getting back to a native level and then going home because he moved back to England. But I always wonder, like, what happened with his language skills on both fronts? 35 fucking years. That's 1 year less than my age. He was spending as an adult learning, speaking, interacting with these indigenous people, multiple different dialects, and not speaking with a single English speaker for that long. And that, yeah, he still was able to sort of communicate when he came out of the bush after that amount of time with English speakers. So, yeah, I can't remember what we were talking about originally, but I remember that sort of tangent. I was just like, fuck, yeah, pronunciation and everything. So, yeah, I think a lot of people just don't appreciate how much work it requires and that it's ongoing. And I think, too, there aren't good resources out there to show them how to do it. That was the whole reason I made a course about Australian pronunciation. And so it's one of those difficult things. I think learning English is easy, in that there's so many resources out there for learning just sort of basic English, like American, British English. But if you want to really knuckle down in a certain dialect, it's so much harder. Yeah. Like if you were to try and learn South African English, New Zealand English, Australian English, anytime you sort of dive down into a specific area, there's significantly less resources. And I think, too, you're kind of left to your own devices. But then, yeah, it's kind of funny that people will get criticized for not being able to do it, but then there's no one really, like the Australian government, I don't think they've done an amazing job with trying to help people integrate into Australian society. We have this huge, sort of migration system set up to bring people in. We have the highest number of migrants per capita in the world. And yet I think the way in which we take care of them is kind of shit. They get here and it's kind of like, yeah, integrate. Good luck. See ya. You're kind of like, okay, cool.
Yeah. Well, I always know about, I suppose, like the visa system, because I just seem to meet like so many people who are on visas here, and it's it seems so complicated. I don't know why people want to come here. I know why people want to come here. Obviously, it's an amazing country, but I don't know why they try and pull up with the bullshit of the visa system. I know if it was me, I'd just be like, I'm not sure if it's worth it.
Well, but that's you from an Australian perspective,
Very
right?
much
You're not
so.
coming from somewhere like Afghanistan or Iran being like, yeah, okay.
I would do anything. Yeah, I'll put up with
Exactly.
any level of
So
bureaucracy.
I think that's a big part of it, right? When it comes to becoming, Australian that way, there's just such a massive motivation for a lot of people coming from a lot of these places. But yeah, I think you were talking about, are there any patterns that I see in terms of people and their pronunciation and skills? That sort of comes down to a personal level and the student and how motivated they are. And so, yeah, you'll have people of all different backgrounds. Like my wife's a good example. She came from a sort of poor background in Brazil, but her English is just phenomenal. It was the best that I've ever heard from a Brazilian person, and that's not because the average Brazilian is shit at English. It's just that she studied her ass off and just seemed to get pronunciation. And it's really funny, again, not to shit on my wife, but I tried to encourage her to learn French, and she was so shit at French when she was trying to learn it. And I just remember being like, you learn English in like 3 years to like, really, really high levels. And yet you just kind of get your head around, the basics in French, which is another Latin language. Like you in Portuguese, come on, you guys are so close. And she was just like, I don't know.
Motivation.
I don't know.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's like the motivations there were different. She was kind of like, it's just a little hobby that I'm kind of like, I don't really care. Whereas when she was learning English, she came to Australia with no English, literally zero, and had to learn it all here. And now it works,
as well. Yeah, jeez.
Yeah, exactly. Fuck. But so yeah, I think it depends on the student and their motivation. And I don't think, I've met rich people, intelligent people, poor people who've had all kinds of different levels in English after years of being in Australia. And at the end of the day, I think it does just come down to personal motivations and also your surroundings, right? Like, I think part of the reason my wife did really well with English is that she went somewhere like Townsville where there wasn't necessarily a huge group of foreigners there.
Can't be, right?
There were some migrants, but it wasn't like Melbourne, where if you live in the CBD, you could be forgiven for thinking the place was Singapore, right? Like you go around and walk around in the streets and you're more likely to hear a foreign language being spoken than English. And that's not a negative thing, it's a good thing. But at the same time, it is funny chatting to a lot of foreigners. They're like, I get to Melbourne and there's no Australians. And you're like, that's what a big city is in a country where it has shitloads of migration. Yeah. Like, where do you think people go and stay? Why are they migrating here? Like, they go and stay in the cities, go to regional Australia, and you'll think it's, it's effectively another country. But yeah. So
yeah, true. The there was something on the top of my brain there about the regional and language differences, but it escapes me. Any other like fun hobbies you've been going down, Pete?
No,
nothing new.
Just trying to manage mental health and kids and family. It's really funny. Like, I found since having just young kids, so not like babies anymore, but having, not even toddlers anymore. Both my kids are kind of small children now that can both talk and get around. It's so much more draining emotionally and mentally and everything than when they were babies. I found, at least. And I remember I used to have so much energy for Aussie English, my job, and I was so passionate about interviewing other people and having them on the podcast and doing all this research and learning about them and everything. And now it's like fucking survival mode, man, where when the kids aren't here, they're at daycare, and I'm just like, I want to sleep.
Yeah,
I want to play guitar. I want to rest. I need to recoup, and I'll do the. At the moment, I've sort of Aussie English has kind of been on the what would you say? Not life support, but just doing the bare minimum to kind of keep things going and survival mode kind of thing. And so I wasn't anticipating that. And it's always hard. I don't know if that's just a personal thing for me individually, or if this is just a stage that most parents kind of go through with young kids. But Jesus Christ, man, I'll tell you what, it is exhausting. Just the fights that you have with the kids constantly over the most trivial shit of like, just eat your veggies and, you know, it's time for a shower, and they'll both just melt down, and you're just like, I just want to cry.
Yeah.
So not a positive note to end on, but I guess I want to bring it up because that is one of those things that I'm sort of struggling with at the moment, is just like maintaining that kind of, that mental health, trying to stay positive, trying to be a good parent, trying to juggle work, and it's not easy. It's not easy, but that's real life. So I'm looking forward to when you meet a Brazilian chick and have some kids, and bring her back to Australia, go through the full process of making her an Australian citizen and teaching her English, and then you get to go through the stages of having children, and I'll have to keep a close eye on your progress.
Yeah, exactly.
See how it mirrors with mine.
Yeah, no, I get you, man. There's only something I've started talking about recently on the podcast, but my mum has Alzheimer's, and
I'm sorry to hear that, dude.
Yeah, she's kind of like getting into like the real last stages at this moment. You were talking about the swearing, and that's one thing that's actually kind of popped up recently, which is, I mean, it's funny you mentioned it. It's not fun when it's happening, but it's at the stage where she needs a lot of care.
Yeah,
and you know, me and my brother are helping out my dad with that, and it is. I don't know if it's what having a child is like, but it's like when you're there, it's 100% like focus attention on her. You gotta really be there. And it is draining, right? So I totally get you on that front. Is there anything you're doing in particular to, I don't know, keep mentally sane to make sure you're not going overboard? The guitars.
I think that's why I've kind of given myself permission to dive into these hobbies a little bit over the last few years, because I didn't really, prior to having kids, it was a lot of Aussie English and just going full ball with the business and work and everything. But I think it's kind of hard to escape into work when I have kids, because they're both kind of, you know, work, and I needed a kind of more of a spiritual creative kind of outlet. And so that was why, you know, I got into the plants thing and into the guitar thing more recently. It's just, it's being able to escape a little bit, even if it's just for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour. And I think giving myself permission to do that, because I felt a lot of guilt initially when I get into these sorts of hobbies, especially if I spend hard-earned money on these things. And it's always hard to kind of give yourself permission to do that. But for me, at least, it definitely always seems to pay off, and I always seem to make it work. So
yeah, nice.
Yeah, nice. I'm definitely glad I've done it, but yeah.
Good to hear, man. Good to hear. Well, if people are interested in tuning into the Aussie English and any of the other stuff that you're going on, where would you recommend they go to?
We'll just check out the website. Yeah. So you can go to aussieenglish.com.au or just search it in Google, and I'm sure the YouTube channel, Instagram, and all that stuff will show up. The website will show up. Should be the first thing to come up, Aussie English Podcast, and you'll find it. But I think if you're like Kyrin and you're a native speaker of English, especially if you're Australian, you may enjoy the Goss episodes on the podcast more than the English learning content. So the Goss is where I sit down and chat with my dad about news stories that come up, and he often goes off on tangents and rants and talks about his life growing up in Australia. He's now almost 66, so yeah, for sure, awesome. Honestly, like, these are somewhat cathartic for me as well, just chatting with you, talking about random language I'm
stuff.
always amazed, because that's how you got onto me, right? I think you first started listening to the Goss and you sent me a message or something. I can't remember how you first.
This was during a phase when I was reaching out to just like a lot of podcasters. I was kind of doing like as a semi investigation, like how are other people doing their podcasts, what are some good tips that I can take away, and then also kind of like connection wise. So I was just reaching out. So I would have listened to a couple of episodes for sure. And
I always get amazed by that, though. I get comments a lot of the time on the podcast or on YouTube, those videos where there's so many Americans that are interested in Australian English, and I'm always just like perplexed. So why?
You have no idea.
Why do you guys give a shit about us?
Apparently some of our downloads, there was like a big chunk of them, and they were coming from Nepal. I'm just like, are these like Nepalese Sherpas up on Mount Everest, like
because
listening
that's
to
all there is in Nepal.
yeah. Or like or I remember there was like a big chunk of Indian listeners for a while, and I'm just wondering if it's because like just the very name itself, Mere Mortals, is kind of like, you know, Indians are kind of like spiritual. They like they've got a lot of mythology and things like this. I know Mere Mortals is more of a like a Latin or Roman thing.
I think it would just be a spontaneous kind of random thing, right? Where some person stumbles across you and then hands you off to, you know, tells a bunch of their friends who tell a bunch of their friends, and then it ends up, you know, taking over a certain little area and becoming. I remember being perplexed with Aussie English. It makes sort of more sense now, but when I first got started and I hadn't really kind of reached saturation of, you know, all the different countries that were fascinated with migration to Australia, it kind of just blew my mind when one country would find me and then it would suddenly explode. Like I remember Brazil for a while, I think because I knew Brazilians and I was learning Portuguese, and I'd done an interview with some Brazilians and stuff. It seemed to get there really quickly and it took over in Brazil, but no other kind of Central American or South American countries were listening to it. And I remember just being like, it's so bizarre that it's like just in this one little area, but the neighboring countries that you would think would have equal interest just haven't found it yet and don't give a shit. So
that's crazy.
Yeah, looking at the stats, you can sit there for ages just being like, oh my God, I got my first download in Greenland.
Yeah.
Fuck yeah. Like, there's like, you know, a few thousand people that live there. How the hell?
Yeah, exactly. That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right, man. We'll call it there for today, and I'm sure we'll be chatting again in the near future.